Hey everyone, this is Crystal, and today I am going to share a really simple Slimline Christmas card with you using the new Slimline cards and envelopes from scrapbook.com. These are pre-cut, pre-scored, pre-folded Slimline card bases and matching envelopes. They measure 8.5 by 3.5 inches. That is the measurement of the front panel of the card, and they are 80-pound paper. These are Nina Solar White cardstock bases. So that's what I'm going to be using as the base of my card. For supplies, I have at the scrapbook.com wafer thin metal die set in nested squares. I'm going to be using these three smallest dies for that. And my idea is to create a little stack of gifts up the front of the card. And then I want to use one of these sentiments from the Merry Sentiments stamp set at the very top. I believe that's my plan right now, to add a sentiment to the front of this card. And I'm going to be die cutting these from some papers from the Merry Days collection. So this is it last year or the year before? This is 2018, so it's a couple years old. But I haven't purchased any holiday themed supplies this year because my stash is already overflowing. So I need to use what I have. So I purchased this from scrapbook.com a couple years ago, and that's what I'm going to be using for this card. I have the 6x8 pad, and then I do have one sheet of the this is the tinsel paper. I'm going to be using this side of it as my card base. So that is the plan. That's where I'm going to start. I'm going to go ahead and show you how I put this together. So I'm going to start by die cutting the presents. So I've chosen 3 papers from that 6x8 paper pad from the Merry Days collection. I've chosen ones that had a bit of contrast with that pink plaid paper that I plan to use as the background. So I wanted them to stand out on that background paper. So I have 3 here. I'm choosing which one is going to be the biggest. That's going to be this first one here, this floral. And then I will add the second biggest square to the red polka dot, and then the third biggest square to that kind of greenery paper. And those are going to stack up on my card like presents. So I'm going to do all 3 and die cut them all at once, which is why I'm trimming around each one so that they will all fit on my magic mat together, so I don't have to run these through my die cut machine 3 times. And perhaps you've noticed, but I do have a new die cut machine sitting there to the side. I treated myself to a Platinum 6 from Spellbinders. I did a bit of research before buying it, and I decided this one was the one for me, mostly because it folds up and can hide away in my very small crafty space without taking up too much room. So that's what I've chosen. I'm using it with the Magic Mat, of course, from scrapbook.com, and the pink ballet slipper glitter cutting mat, and it cuts beautifully. You'll see here in just a second as soon as I run this through. And I do have to say, I mean, I was using that super old Epic 6 die cutting machine for many, many years, and this die cut so much easier with so much less effort, so little effort to pull it through. I was so happy with how this worked. So there they are. I just have to pull away that mint tape that I used to secure them to keep them in place. And then you will see these beautifully die cut squares. These dies cut perfectly on this magic mat. So I was super, super happy with how this all turned out. So I'm just going to peel away the mint tape, and I do save that because you can use it many, many times. It's definitely not single use. You can use it to die cut or hold a stencil in place or whatever many times before you have to actually throw it away. So keep that in mind if you use the mint tape. Okay, so I have trimmed down my card panel to the size of the Slimline card. So I decided to add a gold border. So I actually have a piece of mirror cardstock. This is gold mirror cardstock from Tonic Studio. I've added that as the full size card front, and then I've trimmed down that pink plaid paper just a 1/4 inch in on each side from the original dimensions of the card, so that it has just a little bit of a gold border around the whole thing. I thought that would be perfect for this festive holiday card. And now I'm using those same papers to add some ribbons to my presents. So I'm just trimming 1/4 inch strips using my Fisker's trimmer and kind of matching up which one I want to use with each present. I did pull in another paper from that 6x8 paper pad because I wanted something that was more pink. So I grabbed that kind of pink and red crosshatch pattern paper and I trimmed just 1/4 inch of that off the bottom, and I'm going to use that on that bottom present. So this is how I'm going to add my ribbons. I have these 1/4 inch strips of pattern paper. I'm lining up each square on my glass mat. This is a We Are Memory Keepers glass mat. And I apologize that my camera was a little bit tilted, so things are not straight in the shot. I didn't realize that somebody must have bumped my camera stand, and I totally didn't realize it before I was filming, so I apologize for that. But the effect is the same. So I lined it up, and then I'm going to use this tape runner from scrapbook.com to add the strip right down the center. So I'm using the lines on my glass mat to figure out where the center of this square is, and then I'm adding that pattern paper just centered on that center line and making sure it is also centered at the bottom, and then just gluing it down, and then I'm going to trim off the excess and then use that to add the kind of cross pattern of the ribbon on either side. And I didn't want these to overlap. I wanted them to sit flush on this present. So I'm just going to add one little piece to each side of this center ribbon. And that's how I'm going to add that kind of cross pattern. So normally, the ribbon would go underneath or over the top, but I didn't want that extra bulk, and I didn't want I wanted it to sit flat. So I'm just cutting little pieces to add to each side. And I'm going to do this for all 3 of these square presents. So I'm just figuring out the best way to do it. I was thinking there that I would do it with my left hand, but that's not going to work for me. My left hand is basically useless. So I just had to flip the present around so that I could add it with my right hand. And that's the first present all done. Now, if I had had some kind of bow die or something like that, maybe I would have added a little bow to the top of each one, but I don't have anything like that in my stash. I even thought about a stamp, but I looked through my stamps and I don't have a bow stamp either. So I didn't have any kind of bow I could add. You certainly could use actual ribbon for this if you wanted to add a little bit of twine around each one or just a little bit of a thin ribbon. That would have totally worked too, but I really wanted to add more pattern paper. I wanted to bring in those same patterns from the presents onto the ribbon. So that's why I chose paper, and that's why I don't have any bows. But I think it would look super cute if you did have a little bow stamp or a little bow die to add a bow to the top or to the center of each of these presents. That would be super adorable. But I'm leaving mine plain, and I do like the way it turns out in the end. It's much more streamlined than it would be if I had added ribbon or bows, but it's still cute, I think, anyway. So I'm just finishing up this second one here, and then I will go ahead and do that last present, and then we can move on to the rest of the card. So next, it's time to stamp my sentiment. So I grabbed this Merry Sentiment stamp set. I'm going to use the Merry Christmas phrase across the top of the stamp set, and I'm going to heat emboss it. And you may notice there, I've already tried it once, and it didn't turn out quite as nicely as I wanted it to. So I'm going to do it again. I didn't make you watch that first one, but what I think happened is that I tried to double stamp it with the Versamark ink, and I think I must have got it slightly misaligned, or maybe I pressed too hard, but it was just a little bit smushy. It wasn't very clearly defined. So I'm going to try it again. I'm going to stamp it just once this time, and I'm just going to lightly press just to make sure that the entire sentiment comes in contact with that black paper that I'm using as a background. I did make sure to use my powder tool so that the embossing powder won't stick to any part of this paper other than the parts where the stamp touched it. And then I'm just going to flick off the rest of this embossing powder. This is gold embossing powder from Ranger, and I'm just going to empty that back into my container and then grab my heat tool. So off camera, I did let my heat tool heat up for about 30 seconds. I wanted it to be good and hot before I brought it over to the paper, just so that it helps reduce some of the warping that happens when you add heat to cardstock. So made sure I got it good and hot, and then I'm just moving it around until the embossing powder melts and becomes shiny. And as soon as it does, then I will put my heat tool away, and then we can die cut our sentiment. So for the sentiment, I am using this little banner die that comes in the snowflake shape die from scrapbook.com. This stamp set is made to fit this particular die, so it will fit perfectly. I just need to line it up and then use a little bit of mint tape. This is that same mint tape that I used to die cut my presents, and I'm going to add that over the top to hold it in place, and then I can take this off camera and die cut it using, again, my Magic Mat and my Platinum 6 machine. So now that I have all of the components of my card ready to go, it's time to start assembling. So I'm going to use some smart glue from scrapbook.com. This is a tacky glue, and I find that I generally have to clean off the top of it just a little bit with a wet wipe before I start. I tend to not remember to put the cap on right away, and it will sometimes clog just the very tip of it. It's just a tiny little bead of glue that's stuck to the top. It doesn't clog any deeper than that, so I never have trouble getting the glue to come out once I remove that tiny little bead that's stuck at the top. I did, however, squeeze this bottle way too hard and got some globs of glue on the back of my card front here. So I'm just using a little scrap of cardstock to help spread that around. These bottles are very flowy, if that's a word, I'm not sure, but you don't have to squeeze the bottle at all. It just kind of naturally flows out, and I made the mistake of squeezing and got a big glob. So using that little piece of cardstock to spread it out just helps keep the glue from kind of seeping around the edges once I glue this down to that mirror cardstock base that I'm adding it to. So I'm just using my best judgment, trying to get it centered. I do stand when I craft, so I can kind of look down over the top of it and make sure that it's as centered as I want it to be. It's not going to be perfect, but that's okay with me. I think that's kind of the beauty of handmade cards. They're never going to be completely perfect, but if they were, then people wouldn't know that they were handmade. So I'm totally fine with it being just a little bit off, but I try my best to get it as close as I can. Same with these presents. I'm going to use this liquid glue again to add just a little bit of glue to the back of each one, and then try my best to get it centered just by eyeballing it. I want it to line up with the bottom of that pink plaid paper, so I don't want it to overlap onto the gold mirror border that I have around my base. I want it just to line up perfectly there. So that's what I'm focusing on, making sure that it doesn't kind of stick out over that mirror cardstock, but that you also can't see any of that pink plaid paper beneath it. And then once I have that one in place, it's just a matter of lining up the other two on top of it. So this one is going to sit right in the center of the first one, and I am just lining up those ribbons that I added to the center of each one. And I thought visually, if they were slightly off, it would look best to have those ribbons lined up and not have to worry about the actual squares being perfectly lined up. So because there is that plaid pattern on the background and it's not perfectly centered, it just kind of throw off your eye anyway. So I thought having those ribbons lined up would give you kind of a visual line down the front of the card to focus on, and it would help it make it look like it was all centered. Okay, so there is my sentiment. I have it all die cut and ready to go. I really love the gold embossing. I think it ties in nicely with that mirror cardstock border. I'm going to pop it up on some foam adhesive. These are super tiny, thin foam strips from scrapbook.com. These are super nice for adhering these tiny little sentiments. I actually used 2 of them. So this sentiment was wide enough. I could have probably used some foam circles or foam squares, but I had this out, and it makes it really easy to get a solid coverage of foam so that the sentiment won't droop at any point on the card, especially if I'm putting it through the mail. I don't want it to get smushed. So having this kind of solid line of foam across the back is going to keep it sturdy and get it stuck down completely. So I want the sentiment to sit up there. I'm thinking kind of in the center there between the top of the present and the top of that pink card base. I'm not going to measure it though. Of course, I'm not going to measure it. I'm just going to eyeball it once again. I will grab my scrapbook.com reverse tweezers here just to keep my fingers kind of out of the way so I can make sure to get it down in the right spot. If you're not really sure or not confident that you're going to get it down in the right spot, you can add just a tiny little bit of liquid glue to the back of that foam, and that will give you a little bit of wiggle room. You can kind of move it around then, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be a rebel and stick it straight down to the card, and you know what? It worked out. out. I'm pretty happy with how that looks. It does help that that background paper is plaid and does have lines on it, so it made it kind of easy to go ahead and line that up with those lines. So I grabbed my mint tape thinking I was going to tape down the front of my card panel, or my card base that is, so that I could line it up, but then I realized my panel is the exact same size as the card front, so I don't need to try and line it up. I just need to stick it down. So I'm just going to add some liquid glue to the back of my card panel and then pick up the card base so that I can use my fingers to make sure that it's lined up on all four sides. And that's just going to make sure that there's no white border around the outside and that it is completely lined up with that card base. And then that's it. That is my Slimline Christmas card all done. Of course, you can add a sentiment to the center if you want to. I will probably do that when I decide who I'm going to send this to, but there's another look at it. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you all back here very soon.